Good evening. Television election broadcast. During the past 2 evenings at this time, 8 o'clock, speakers chosen by the parties have come to the studio to give an election address. Tonight, Sir Hartley Shawcross, President of the Board of Trade, will be speaking on behalf of the Labour Party. With him in the studio is Mr. Christopher Mayhew.
In international commentary, I do my very best to keep party politics right out. And I've always been glad when staunch Conservative viewers have written to me to say that they appreciated this and enjoyed the programs. But now tonight, I give you fair warning, tonight is different. And Sir Hartley Shawcross and I are going to put a case for the Labour Party, to which we belonged for 33 and 17 years respectively, and for which we feel, both of us, a great loyalty and affection. Now, of course, we don't know your politics, but we've decided to assume that you're not normally one of our supporters. Perhaps you read regularly the Express or the Telegraph or the Mail or the Graphic. If you do, I expect you're a bit suspicious already of the kind of thing they serve up to you about the Labour Party. But all the same, in spite of yourselves, maybe you've got some wrong ideas about us, and Sir Hartley Shawcross and I want to try to remove some of them. To begin with, for instance, you may be wondering how it happens that someone so well-dressed, well-educated and well-off as Sir Hartley Shawcross, how he comes to be in the Labour Party. What's your answer to that, Hartley?
Well, my answer, Chris, is why on earth shouldn't I be? It may be unusual to find a working man in the Tory party, but there are tens of thousands of people like me in the Labour Party. You see, I came of an old Liberal family with a long radical tradition, and I was brought up in a London suburb, and I saw something of the two worlds which existed then: poverty, destitution, ill health, in the midst of riches and plenty. Mr. Churchill said the other day that the Labour Party was stirring up hatred between the classes. That's utterly untrue. I hope this doesn't sound priggish, but, you know, we didn't join the Labour Party because we hated our fellow men. We joined it because we loved them and thought it was about time something was done about it, something to wipe out the grosser inequalities of opportunity and of wealth which existed at that time, something to promote real social justice and real liberty. That was in the true liberal tradition, but we weren't achieving it. If any party is a class party, it's really the Tory party. They haven't changed a great deal since Mr. Churchill said of them that they were the party of the rich against the poor. I don't say that with any bitterness or vindictiveness. I've no reason to feel bitter, and I've no use for people who do. But whenever we've introduced measures which have borne more heavily upon the rich than the poor, they have been bitterly opposed. Things like steeply graded surtax on the more wealthy people, profits tax, even dividend limitation during the rearmament period. All those have been opposed. And then everybody knows their attitude towards the social services. I can't feel that these things would be safe if the Tories got back. I mean, things like full employment, certainly, and the health service. They voted against that every time they had a chance. Social insurances, family allowances, the food subsidies. How can these things be safe if the Tories get into power when they've attacked them all the time? And these things are important. I suppose the most important thing now is the cost of living, at any rate on the home front. Now, Chris, give us some of the facts about this.
Well, I'll start with the Conservative attack on the government. And I've got here an exact copy of the official Conservative chart on the cost of living, issued by the Conservative Central Office. I wanted to get the chart that Mr. Eden showed us last night in his broadcast, but the Conservative Central Office wouldn't let me have a look at it. But as far as I can see, it was identical with this, except for these captions. Well, now, this chart, which is based on the excellent index numbers of the London and Cambridge Economic Service, this chart tries to show three things. First, the spectacular, terrifying rise in the cost of living. Second, the fact that the Korean War outbreak here could not have been responsible because it took place after the main rise. And third, that Labour's policies of devaluation, nationalisation and so on, that they were responsible. Now, this chart, and the chart presented to us in perfectly good faith by Mr. Eden last night, these charts have been deliberately faked by the Conservative Central Office. Let me try and show you how. To begin with, the steepness of the rise of the graph. Now, this doesn't come from the figures of the London and Cambridge Economic Service at all. It's obtained simply by squeezing together the top and bottom of the graph and lengthening out the sides. To show what I mean, I've taken exactly the same figures and I faked a graph in the opposite direction. And this will show you exactly what it looks like. Now, those are the same figures, and all I've done is I've put too much space between the years at the top instead of too little, and too little space down the sides instead of too much. I've used exactly the same degree of dishonesty as the Conservative Central Office. Now, it was difficult, but rather fun. Well, now, and here's a third graph. Here is an honest man's chart. I won't swear that it's 100% accurate. I don't believe it's possible. But I have done my very best to give you a fair picture and not a misleading one. And notice this about this graph, that the outbreak of war in Korea takes place before the steepest rise in the curve and not afterwards. Indeed, as you can see, the curve was flattening out up to the outbreak of the war in Korea. Now, this is, of course, in direct contradiction to what Mr. Eden, in perfectly good faith, told us last night. And I can only assume that he was misled by the Conservative Central Office chart, which is completely misleading in this respect as well. We've only got to look back at the original figures of the London and Cambridge Economic Service to see that the illustration given in my honest man's chart is the true one, and the illustration given in the Conservative Central Office chart is completely faked. I wish there were time to point this out to you in detail now. I only invite you to go to your public libraries and make the test for yourself. And we're not finished yet, because there's the third point, the suggestion in the chart and in Mr. Eden's commentary that Labour's policies were responsible. Well, now, this can be quite easily disposed of too, because Britain is not in any specially advantageous position compared with other countries as far as keeping down her cost of living is concerned. On the contrary. So wouldn't we expect to find that if Labour's policies were responsible for the rise in our cost of living, wouldn't we expect to find that countries which had not adopted Labour's policies would do better than us? But let's look at the facts. The facts show exactly the opposite. Look first at the rise in our country, the United Kingdom, since 1945. Well, now, the United States hasn't devalued, hasn't nationalized at all. But look at their rise in the cost of living. And Canada hasn't devalued or nationalized anything. Look at her rise. And as for Italy and France, with non-socialist governments, just look what's happened to them. The French figure for 1945 isn't available. If it had been, it would have proved my case even more. Now, in the whole free world, there are only two major countries, which have done better than Britain in keeping down or restraining the rise in the cost of living. And they are Norway and Denmark. And it's no coincidence at all that Denmark had a Labour government up till October last year, and Norway has had a Labour government all the time. And it's Labour which restrains the rise in the cost of living with Labour's policies, and it's Conservative governments which lets the cost of living rise right up, right beyond the reach of the ordinary person. Well, now, so much for this Conservative chart. It is a fake. And I'm bound to say, after careful study of other misleading features of the chart, which I've not time to point out, it's a deliberate fake. And hats off to television, incidentally. The only medium in the... it is a fake. And I'm bound to say, after careful study of other misleading features of the chart, which I've not time to point out, it's a deliberate fake. And hats off to television, incidentally. The only medium in the world which could have exposed this fake. A medium which, I'm sure, is going to contribute a lot towards honester politics in this country in the future. And indeed, haven't we seen a bit of history tonight? Crippen, you remember, was the first criminal to be caught by wireless. The Conservative Central Office are the first criminals to be caught by television. But now it's time for me to say good night for myself and to ask you, Hartley, to carry the story on.
Well, the reason why we've managed so much better than foreign countries in keeping the cost of living under control is the same as the reason why we've prevented unemployment, why we've built up our export trade, why we've built up the whole productive activity of the country. It's because we've been operating what they call a planned, controlled economy. It simply means deliberately putting first things first, instead of leaving it all to chance. Just take off the profit controls, play about with the food subsidies, abolish bulk purchase, do away with the utility schemes, leave the monopolies and the price rings, and of course prices leap up. That's what they've done in the foreign countries where the conservative policy has been pursued. Mr. Eden last night complained that the purchasing power of the pound had gone down to 14 and sixpence. That's 27%. It would have been more fair, I think, wouldn't it, if he'd told you that in the same time the purchasing power of the dollar had gone down by 31%. But he couldn't blame the socialists for that, so he forgot about it. You know, we are, the mass of us, much better off than we were before the war. Not everybody. I'm not myself. But that's not the test. The greatest good of the greatest number, that's the thing. And taking that, the mass of the people are far better off than they've been before. But we can only maintain and improve on that position if we are able to make the country pay its way in the world. That's the overriding economic problem that we have to solve now. Not a new one. All through the 1930s, the Tories were running the country at a loss, but of course the war made the thing very much worse. And when we took over, there was a heavy deficit. But by our system of planning and controls, by the great enterprise of the people, we built the position back to a surplus greater than we'd ever had for 30 years. And in 1950, we were building up our dollar and gold reserves. We dispensed with Marshall aid, 18 months it was, before it was due to come to an end, in spite of the fact that we were passing on to other countries almost as much as we received. And then came Korea. And because of it, the prices in the world markets rose steeply against us, and now we have a deficit again. Well, we've got to correct that position. If we don't, we face bankruptcy. Now, how to do it? Just suppose we followed the Tory policy and took off all the controls. More imports would come in. More motor cars, more nylons, a lot of luxury things, very nice for some people for a time, but our foreign indebtedness would go up. And that would mean that we couldn't import the essential things, the raw materials to keep our factories going. And on the other hand, if we did away with our systems of planning and control for export production, industry here would tend to concentrate on making the luxury and semi-luxury things out of which big profits are to be made, to the neglect not only of defense but of the export market and of the essential things for the man in the street. So we would be spending more abroad and earning less. When our that way international bankruptcy lies, and international bankruptcy means mass unemployment and a dramatic drop in our standards of living. I'm quite certain that the only way we can avoid it is by continuing this system of planning and control. But the Tories say, very well perhaps, but controls stifle enterprise. You know, it's not so. The wheels of industry here have never evolved faster than they're revolving at present, and overall production has gone up by over 50%. The American administrator of economic cooperation said that our extraordinary progress had astonished the world. Let's keep on with the progress that we've been making. Well, I've been talking about economic affairs because that's my particular department, but I did have a lot to do with the United Nations, and we're all of us very anxious about the international situation, and it's a very dangerous one. But I think that if we build up our defences, as we're all agreed to do, if we support the United Nations and don't betray it, as the Tories betrayed the League of Nations before the war, you remember, if we avoid rash and impetuous adventures, I think we will manage to preserve the peace. It's dangerous, but if we keep our heads, I think we can avoid a war. Keep our heads. Do you remember Mr. Eden talked last night about Persia, and that's certainly an instance of it. He said we ought to have gone to the Security Council earlier. But that would have been an extraordinary thing to do when President Truman had just sent his special representative, Mr. Harriman, to help in the negotiations. No, the only alternative to our policy really meant war, although the Tories don't like to say so, and probably world war. Well, we certainly have avoided that, and I hope eventually we'll have a satisfactory solution. But I saw the other day in an American newspaper an American comment on it, in the greatest, or one of the greatest, of the two conservative newspapers in the States. And this is what they said. They said, the British resolution, and before the Security Council they meant, is reasonable. Above all, it creates the conditions for debate and mediation. And then they went on, the British have reached the present stage through procedures to promote peace. They were under heavy pressure at home to take more militant action. And then they said, last week the British kept their heads. Well, I hope we go on keeping our heads. Well, there it is. I'm not saying we haven't made mistakes. Of course we have. And we've had disappointments and frustrations which weren't of our making. But I know there are just criticisms and complaints. But you mustn't look at only one side of the picture. Look at the picture as a whole. And then there's no doubt, is there, of our overall success and of the great benefits that we've brought to the people of this country and indeed to the peace of the world. And you know, we have the experience and the capacity and the confidence to go steadily forward. You see, we believe in Britain. We're all in this together. Good luck to you all and good night.